All right, are you ready? Yes? Fix your microphone. It's okay. Excuse me. Okay. What is this? Mask. I know it is mask, but why you're wearing it? For protection. Don't worry, I didn't get cold, but it is good that you're caring about protection because this is the topic of this video as well. Oh, so you're gonna talk about how to mask machine learning models? No, that's not the topic. Protection. Oh, you're gonna talk about differential privacy, how to secure your private and sensitive information in training data when you're training machine learning models, right? No, this is the topic we already recorded a video out of it. So today's topic is different. It's about networking. Oh, networking. So it means how to efficiently expand our network and connections in AI community, right? No, stop. Just let me explain.
Okay.
By networking, I mean we are going to figure out how we can make the training and even deployment environment of our machine learning process in a secure manner. For example, imagine that you are the environment that I am training and deploying my machine learning models, and now I want to put you in a virtual network. So what does that mean now? What is virtual network here? Now no one can access to this environment from public internet except secured virtual networks or networks that I trust them and I can let my data scientists access to this environment from those networks. Oh, this is perfect, MG, but can you please make your virtual network a little bit bigger? It's pretty tight. I usually go with large or extra large maybe. Okay, actually there's a concept of sizing in virtual networks as well. It will declare how many IPs of compute instances and servers you can put inside. Then please fix the sizing, and also your virtual network is getting out of your video frame. Okay, let's go. Hello everyone, this is MG. I'm a data scientist and cloud solution architect, and welcome to another video. In this video, we will be hands-on with creating a secure Azure machine learning environment with networking. So let's go through it together. All right, before going through the details, talking about the networking and how we can secure Azure machine learning environment, let's start with this diagram. This is actually the summary of all we are planning to achieve in this video and what we're going to actually enable. So let me explain this thoroughly because it is very important that you do understand the components here and the reason behind and why we are going to deploy and enable this. And afterwards, all the rest of the video is about how to be hands-on to enable and deploy what you see in this diagram. So, first of all, you can see on the top, when we create an Azure Machine Learning Workspace, again, if you know what is Azure Machine Learning Workspace and you want to have a little bit of understanding about this Azure resource, make sure you check out the first video of MLOps video series. I'll add this video on the top right of this screen. It is an introduction about this service, what are the capabilities and components that help you with your machine learning project. And now we're going to actually deploy this service but in a secure environment behind a virtual network. So make sure there's no public internet access to this environment because of course we are dealing with our own project and we are not necessarily want to take the risk of exposing to public internet if it's not needed. We just want to give access to the proper network for the proper people who are required to be hands-on in this service. So on the top we can see I have Azure Machine Learning Workspace here. And when you deploy Azure Machine Learning Workspace, it comes with also a storage account, with container registry, with Azure Key Vault, and even application inside. So just quickly why they're coming with, this storage account can be used for not only storing some potential logs and metrics for your development process with Azure Machine Learning, but also whenever you do let's say any experimentation, if you use AutoML, if you write down your code in a notebook, so they need a place to be stored, right? That's a disk that can support your Azure ML Workspace, and also it can use for putting your features, your data to do some quick POC and leverage the service there. For container registry is all about storing the images that we need when we deploy, let's say, the model in production over a container or Kubernetes. We need to have an image that talks about what are the operating system requirements and the Python packages. We need to have them installed in the environment that we're going to deploy the model. So we create these requirements as an image. We put it in container registry. So later on, when we want to redeploy the model, we know where the image is, and Azure ML use that to store and load back the image to deploy the model. And Key Vault, some of the storage account, let's say keys or credential information, all of them are stored in a Key Vault that is connected to Azure ML Workspace. So when you're coding, you do not need to put those sensitive information in your notebook, which is of course not a best practice. Let's say if you want to connect to any storage, to SQL database, so on and so forth, you don't need to put your username and password in the code. If the connection is created, all those sensitive information is stored in the Key Vault, and Azure ML can read them. All of these services, they need to be connected to the virtual network. And what do I mean with virtual network? Take a look at this one. This is called Network Hub. We are specifying a virtual network in Azure Machine Learning, as you can see all this rectangular here. It's saying that this is the address of the addresses range of my virtual network, and this will specify how many IPs I can have inside this virtual network. By saying IP, for example, each compute instance that you create in Azure ML will use one IP. So you should have enough IPs inside this network to support that. And when you put the range in Azure ML portal, we'll see that it will tell you how many IPs. Let's say with read range, I think it's going to be thousands of IP addresses you can have. Within virtual network, in order to have a better management of the way that we're specifying these IPs and also providing access over all these virtual network components, we can divide our virtual network in multiple subnets. Now let's take a look to see how many subnets we need for Azure ML Workspace. First, we have the training subnet, and similar to virtual network, you can see that also we have another range here as well that specify, okay, how many IPs you want to have as a capacity for the subnet that is inside your virtual network. Let's say if you have 200 available IPs, it means that, for example, you can have 200 compute instances created in Azure ML Workspace inside this subnet. But there's another subnet called a scoring subnet here. This one is actually for the place that you deploy the model. That can be Kubernetes, container instance. And the reason that we're distinguishing these two subnets, you can say that, well, why do we don't just create one big subnet to combine these two and have all the computes related to machine learning there? Well, the reason is in compute instance, in scoring subnet, let's say you want to deploy the model over Kubernetes. Kubernetes by itself will use a lot of IP addresses. So we don't want to lose the lack of control of how many IPs are available in the subnet and potentially face up with lack of space in the subnet, so we cannot launch any other compute anymore. So let's keep them as a best practice separated. Similarly, we will have another subnet for private endpoints. I'm going to talk about this more. Why do we need this? Azure Bastion subnet, we also need this as well. And the reason is, when we put our Azure Machine Learning Workspace inside this virtual network, then no one can access to this anymore. If I open my browser and go to my Azure portal and go to that Azure ML Workspace, it's gonna show me an error saying that, oh, you're coming from public internet, you cannot access to this. Then how can I access to this? First way is creating a virtual machine, like named as Jumpbox. That virtual machine will be inside this virtual network. So if I want to open my Azure Machine Workspace, first I have to come to that virtual machine that is inside my virtual network And then when I open that virtual machine, it's like a desktop, it's like my laptop. Then I open the browser inside that virtual network, and then I can go to Azure Machine Learning Workspace, because the place that I'm coming to my Azure Machine Learning is inside my virtual network, which is a virtual machine. Then how can I go to that virtual machine? Azure Bastion is a safe way to go. It by itself, you will face to Azure Bastion, and the Azure Bastion authenticate you to the virtual machine that you have. I'll talk to this more a bit, but this is the reason that we can have Azure Bastion, a subnet that we need for Bastion to authenticate through it, comes through it, and then from here I can open Azure Machine Workspace to read Jumpbox. The other way, and even more efficient way, is not using Jumpbox or Azure Bastion. We can use VPN. Usually that's the case in enterprises. With point to site VPN, what I can do, let's say now I have my company laptop as a data scientist, I turn on the VPN, and that point to site VPN has connectivity to this virtual network. So because I'm going to Azure Machine Learning Workspace with the VPN turned on, the connection is already there, so I can go to this virtual network and open my Azure Machine Learning Workspace. Then there is no virtual machine Jumpbox needed to go in and then go to Azure ML. For doing so, for this gateway, we also need to have a subnet there. So that's the first way with Azure Bastion. You can go to an Azure Machine Learning Workspace that is behind the VNet. And the second way is using point to site VPN. This one is easy. The second one is a little bit advanced, but we cover both of them. And of course, we need to have Firewall to control the inbound and outbound traffic. What can we access from, let's say, this virtual network to the outside, and who from outside can access to. So for having more layer of security, we also create a firewall for this network, and firewall needs its own subnet as well. That's why we have another subnet. So one subnet here, we talked about this, this one, and this one I told you I'm going to talk a little bit more. So each components that, as you know, they come with Azure Machine Learning Workspace, they need to connect to this virtual network. This storage account need to connect to this virtual network. Same thing to this one, and same thing to Key Vault. How they can access to this virtual network? Through private endpoint. And because we want to have this private endpoint, which is like a secure connection to this virtual network, we need to have them inside a subnet separated. So that's why we create a subnet to put just these private endpoint of these services, to welcome them to this virtual network. Actually, it's better to say that welcome them to this subnet, and this subnet is already inside this virtual network. So with coming to this subnet, it means that I am inside the virtual network, and now as you can see, everything is isolated through a virtual network. And there are two ways, 1 and 2, that I explain here, that you can access to this virtual network and open the Azure Machine Learning Workspace. So no public internet access to what you're doing in your environment anymore. I know I draw too much. It sounds a little bit complicated, but don't worry. From now, we will step by step start to see how we can enable them. And when you see them in action, that totally makes sense for you. All right, let me remove all of this. So now let's start to actually deploy the components that we need, which is start to create this virtual network in these subnets. And then when we have all these subnets created inside this virtual network, we can also have this Azure ML Workspace storage account and all these resources created. So at some points we are using codes as a best practice to deploy them. I'm using PowerShell here for instance here. But some of the steps we will do them through the Azure portal to have a better understanding the process. Instead of automating everything in code and just see the results, it's better to go step by step through the portal and see exactly what we are doing, the settings that we are specifying, why we are doing so, and then see the deployment in action, okay? But of course, whatever we are discussing here can be all automated through all codes. All right, so let me now go to the code that I use for deploying the virtual network and the subnets. So here I actually executed all the codes and the configurations we need for this video, because some of these steps are a little bit time consuming. So I have to make sure they're all deployed to do not take the time when I'm recording the video, and also making sure all the components are working properly. So I already had my tenant ID, my subscription ID here, and my resource group name. I removed them just for safety. but yours going to be certainly different. You put them there. That's the name that I use for the resource group that I'm going to deploy everything, and the location is for me West US, but yours can be different. And also all the codes, all the steps that I'm sharing here, I'll add the link of the tutorial, the codes that you can access to redeploy everything inside the video description in the downside, so you can see and follow the steps as I did and access to all these codes. So here, I am creating the resource group with the name that I specified here. And then the virtual network that I want to create, remember I told you about the range. That range will specify for me how many IPs I can have available. You can calculate them based on this range here, the address here. Remember I talked about the virtual network subnets. We had the training subnet, scoring subnet, the Bastion subnet, gateway, or the one that we will use when we're going to use VPN to connect to this virtual network, and then open Azure Machine Learning Workspace. We want to have Firewall, and it has its own subnet, and the private endpoint subnet for connecting the storage account, key vault, container registry, so on and so forth. So I'm using Windows PowerShell. That's the code. I submit it, and I will show you what happened after I executed this code. And there you go. So I was able to actually, excuse me, see the virtual network that I created. I name it my hub. Based on the code that I executed that I showed you. You can certainly choose a different name. And all the subnets which are inside that virtual network are created for me with the ranges that I specified. And also, you can see how many IPs are available based on the ranges that we have specified here. This is the available IPs I was talking about. And this virtual network is already located inside Azure ML networking resource group. Why? Again, because I specified everything here. This is my resource group, and this is the virtual network. I named it my hub with all the ranges. Pretty similar, right? That's it. Now we have the virtual networks, and also now we have the subnet created inside those virtual networks. Now coming back to this diagram, now we have the subnets and virtual networks. So the next step, as you can guess, is deploying the Azure resources like a storage account, Azure Machine Learning, container registry, all the Azure resources we need, and then connect them to these virtual network configurations that we did. So now let's deploy these services here. Here's the code for deploying the rest of the resources. Again, I'm using PowerShell with the command line saying new Azure resource group deployment. I give it a name as an example, anything inside the resource group that I want to have. Where did I define it? Remember in the previous code, I said that this is the resource group. So inside the same resource group, I want to deploy these services. And I'm referring the services in a JSON template coming from Microsoft Quick Start. Let's actually take a look at this code. Let me copy this URL. And I pasted it here. Maximize it. There you go. So here it starts with some parameters that I should specify them. For example, this parameter asks me, okay, give me the Azure Machine Learning Workspace name that you want to specify. And that's why here I have the workspace name that I want to create. We can again give it any name. Or there are some other parameters. For example, what is the location? West US, remember I defined it here. The container registry information, the VNet, well, I want to deploy this inside my hub VNet that I created. And these are the addresses, and of course I want to use this private endpoint subnet that I created to connect to Azure Machine Learning Workspace. Let me explain you what is this. This is exactly this Azure Machine Learning Workspace that I want to connect to this private endpoint subnet, and the rest for the rest of the others, right? And if I go back to the code after having all these parameters, storage account, I want to have also storage account behind the VNet, the same virtual network that I have. Then it's going down all the way, it will start to actually deploy the resources based on some conditions that I have specified and the parameters that it read on the top. So that's a good quick start to actually use for deploying the resources. But you can always come up with your own infrastructure as a code and configurations that you have. So this is what I use, and with the same link that I'm gonna add, you will also have access to this quick template to have this as a start to deploy the resources. Now, done. I execute this, clicking on run a script, and then let's see what happened after. Then I actually came to this Azure Machine Learning Networking resource group, and then I was able to see the components that we were talking about all created for me. Some of them I created after, not by the code, but for example, let me see, where is the storage account? Let me scroll down. There you go. For example, this Azure Machine Learning that we were talking about with the name I specified is now available in my Azure portal, and I was able to see it properly. Let's go back. What else is here? You can see the private endpoints, and of course the VNet and all the subnet we created. You can see the key vault coming from the last script that we deployed. It is created. Container registry, it is also created. So these are the main components, the application inside, and the storage account that we need for this solution is now deployed. So coming back to the initial picture, now we have these subnets with Azure resources that we need. They're all deployed, and let's see what is the next step. Now if I go to this Azure Machine Learning Workspace, if there is no virtual network, then perfect, it is already deployed. I need to just click on it. I showed you that it's deployed in Azure ML, in Azure ML Networking Resource Group. Usually it should be fine. You should be able to see everything and start coding. But in this case, if I now go with the public internet that I'm using right now to connect to this Azure Machine Learning Workspace, it won't work. And let's see what it's gonna show. This is what you will see, telling that the connectivity to the workspace from public internet is disabled. It sounds like an error, but I'm happy to see this because this seems that, okay, perfect. Now my workspace is secure behind the VNet and no one can just go through the internet and access it. But then the question would be, how can I securely, as a data scientist who need to have access to this workspace, get connected to it? Remember, we talked about two ways: Azure Bastion, or use Azure Bastion to authenticate to a VM, virtual machine Jumpbox, and then from that VM inside, open Azure ML Workspace. Or use VPN. VPN connected to my virtual network and then open this Azure ML Workspace. But are we done with all the virtual network configurations, private endpoints? No, there are some steps left. What is the next step? Again, I always refer back to the initial plan. This is our map. Whatever we're gonna do, I'll come back to this and explain what we are to make sure we're not losing the track here. Let me draw actually here. So we have these subnets, all of them we deployed. But here, these resources that we created with the last script, we have to create these private endpoints from each of them and say that use this private endpoint to connect to the subnet. So this one we should create this one, and this one. This is the part that I'm going to use Azure Portal to see how we can do it. But again, everything that we do as of now even can be coded. So let me open my Azure Portal. Okay, let me remove all of this. Let's start actually with that storage account. Remember this one? This needs the private endpoint. Let's enable it actually. So this is the same resource group that I deployed everything, and this storage account is deployed using the last script from this template. So I was able to see this, and now when I open it, I will go to networking, and there you go. Now it is asking me that, would you like to access from all networks or just selected networks? So I want to get access certainly to selected networks, right? And also when I go to the private endpoint connections, here it was empty, there were nothing. And I wanted to create a private endpoint, so I clicked on it. Then I said, this is the subscription that I want to have, and the resource group, I'm using the same resource group that I created everything. I give it a name, let's say MG03. Let's go to the next tab. It is asking me what is the sub resource that you want to create a private endpoint. Remember, in storage account, there's a separate private endpoint for blob and also separate endpoint for, let's say, file. So which ones we need for Azure Machine Learning, we need file and blob. So you need to create this private endpoint 2 times, one for blob, one for file. Let's say now this time for file, clicking on next. It is asking me which subnet you want to connect this private endpoint. Come back to the map. Here is the subnet. I have created a subnet called private endpoint and I want to connect to this, right? So I am inside this my hub virtual network, and inside this there is a private endpoint subnet that I want to connect to. And that's it. The rest I'll keep as is. I go to tag, and if I click on review and create, it will start creating. I don't want to create because I already did. You can see that I have 2 private endpoints, one of them for blob as I told you. Then I did the same thing for the file instead, and I'm good to go. But just for a storage account. The next one is coming back to our map. It's Key Vault, right? So exactly we're gonna do the same for the Key Vault that we deploy using this script. And there you go. This is the Key Vault that has been created inside the same resource group. I go to networking, and I want to have also private endpoint connection. You see I created this before recording, but how I did it, very simple. Clicking on create, exactly the same thing as we did. Inside this resource group, let's give it a name. Clicking on next, the resource type. Here you should actually select Key Vault. Let me actually find the full name. I can just type Key Vault. There you go. And then the resource. Let me create a new one, which is the one that we already created. We are inside this Key Vault. That's the resource I'm gonna use, which is inside Azure ML Networking resource group. This is the resource that I'm creating this private endpoint for. And keep it as Vault, virtual network. Oh, I think I didn't select the proper resource group. Let me check. No, I'm in MG, Azure ML Networking, correct. The name. Everything sounds good. Why it's not bringing the virtual network? Let me double check, going back. Oh, actually, here's the reason. The region we selected US West, not the Central. So let me check US West. Oops. There you go. Clicking on next. We are not going to change anything. We're all good. And there you go. This is the virtual network that we have, my hub. And again, we're going to connect to private endpoint subnet. If I go with the tags and no tag specifically, I will click on this, it will start to create. I'm not going to do that because I did before, and this is what you will see after. I gave it a name, and I'm connecting to this private endpoint, succeeded, all good. So what is the next one? Now the next one is the Azure Container Registry that we created, again coming to this diagram. That also needs private endpoint to connect to the subnet. So let's create a private endpoint for this. This is the resource group that we have for this demo. And let's see, where is the container registry? There you go, I found it, it's here. I clicked on it, and this is the settings section. I click on networking, private access, and there you go, we can create another private endpoint. So again, I very quickly go through this because this is exactly the same. We give it a name, test, US West, my subscription, my resource group. Clicking on next. Yep, registry, everything is fine. Clicking on virtual network, and the same subnet. Let me create my virtual network, select my virtual network, and the private endpoint subnet. Clicking on tag. If I click on review and create, it's gonna create one. Again, I don't because I already did, and it is here. Perfect. Now coming back to this diagram, I mentioned that there are already 2 ways that you can access your Azure Machine Learning Workspace that is behind the virtual network. The first way and easier way that we're gonna start is having a virtual machine inside your network, and with using Azure Bastion, we connect to this virtual machine, and when we are here inside this virtual machine, I can open the browser and connect to Azure ML or go to the URL of Azure ML Workspace, and I'm done. This one is simpler, but it has some caveats. It's not cost efficient because just having one VM and having multiple people connecting the Jumpbox and loading the Azure ML Workspace is a bit challenging, and also you have to pay for the virtual machines that you have to have it up and running to let people coming in and open Azure Machine Learning Workspace there. So a better and more efficient way would be using the point-to-site VPN. It's a little bit more advanced, but we'll come through this as well. So let's start with this one. Then we need to certainly create a bastion. Then what is, again, Azure Bastion? So Azure Bastion is a fully managed service that provides more secure and seamless remote desktop protocol, or RDP, and even SSH access to virtual machines without exposure of through any public IP addresses, which is a great advantage. So if I'm going to connect to this VM through SSH or RDP, I don't need to have the public IP or public IP address. I go through Azure Bastion with Azure Portal, and then from there I can connect to my VM. So that's a very safe and secure way. Then let's create one. Here I can type Azure Bastion. I click on it. I already created one, but I'm doing this again. As you can see in this resource group, I already have one called My Bastion created, but to show you how I did, I clicked on create. With the same subscription, the resource group, the same one that we're deploying everything, Azure ML Networking. Give it a name, test 1, 2, 3. Again, US West. For the tier, keep it as standard. The same thing for the instance count, and it is actually the question that is saying Bastion can support up to 50 VM instances to authenticate. So here, even one for me would be enough. So the virtual network, remember the same virtual network that we are deploying everything inside. And inside this virtual network, we had a subnet created for Azure Bastion. Coming back to our architecture, this is the subnet that we're talking about. Perfect. It already know that we have it, so I select it. And then I want to create a new public IP. This is actually not for the VM. This is for the front-end IP configuration when you create the Bastion. And you can give it a public IP address name, and that's it. If I click on next, it's going to show me the validation process, and I click on create. I'm done. So if I click on it, it's all over. I'm not going to do that because I created before, and there you go. I name it My Bastion, and it is here. So now you know that how I created this, and again, all of that process can be coded as well. Now that I have this Azure Bastion, but I don't have a virtual machine to let my data scientists go to that virtual machine using Bastion and then open Azure Machine Learning Workspace there, right? So let's create quickly a virtual machine. I just type virtual machines. Again, I already created one. This is the one I created inside this resource group. But how I did it? Very simple. I click on create Azure Virtual Machine. All right. Here's the subscription. Again, the same resource group. Virtual network name, test 1, 2, 3, any name. US West is the region. For now, let's skip that. The security type can be standard. For the virtual machine type or the image type that I used, I actually selected Windows Server 2022. For the size, we don't need anything big for now. Let's keep it as is. Just give it a username, MG, and the password that you have to actually type it 2 times. Oop. Let me put mine. And then for the public inbound ports, I want to have none. So what does that mean? Access to virtual machine is restricted to the source in the same virtual network. This is good. But here I'm saying that by default, I don't want to have any public inbound ports connected to that, because then I'm going to specify later and I'm going to authenticate through Azure Bastion. So I think I'm good. I can click on review and create, but you can have some specific disk configurations. Again, up to you. The OSD type, I can keep it as is. The rest, I think I'm fine. But here's the cool part, networking. I want to create this virtual machine inside my virtual network. Coming back to our map, I want to have this virtual machine inside this my hub virtual network. And of course, I want to have connected to private endpoint subnet. No, this time for training subnet. Why? Let me come back to this. This is the compute instance that we're going to create in Azure ML. Remember, if you have watched the video, you know that in Azure ML you can create a compute, a GPU, CPU, execute your data science code, and enjoy. So where those compute instances are created or going to be created, they are going to go to my training or ML training subnet. And now I want to use the same compute instance when I open Azure ML Workspace, so I can have my virtual machine inside this subnet. Let me actually draw. So if I have the VM here, when a user comes through Azure Bastion, let's say I am the data scientist, with this Azure Bastion, I can authenticate to this VM, and this VM is already inside the subnet, and there you go. Then from this VM, I can open Azure ML Workspace and then create a compute instance or cluster, and there you go. I'm good, right? So I have chosen this training subnet, and remember, for public IP we don't want to have anything. This is great because I'm using Azure Bastion, so my VM or my virtual machine doesn't have even any public IP. Perfect, this is what exactly I need, and I'm good to go. If I click on create, I'm done. I'm not going to create on it because I already created, and there you go, it is here. So I clicked on this virtual machine. You see on the operation side there's Bastion. I click on it and I can connect using Bastion. It is asking me the user and path. It is the same user and path that I defined when we were creating. Remember, it asked me the user and path, and I add MG as the username. So let's click on connect. And there you go. It is loading my virtual machine for me. I didn't need to have the public IP at all. And my virtual machine now is actually up and running, and these are the previous links that I opened before, right? So now from here I can open, let's say, Microsoft Edge or any browser, and then from inside that browser I can say, okay, now go to portal.azure.com, and then from there you can open your Azure Machine Workspace. You're good to go. So I am not using my own computer, which is here. I cannot access to Azure Workspace, but when I open this virtual network, this virtual machine using the Bastion, now here I can have a virtual desktop that I can open it and then go to Azure Workspace, because I am here now. I am not outside the virtual network here. I was here before, but using the Bastion, I connected to that VM which is here, and I could open Azure ML Workspace. So that was the easiest step. And the nice way to connect to Azure ML behind the virtual network. But let's go through the second, a bit advanced mechanism, which is using point to site VPN. So how we can do this one then? Let's go. Let me close this VM first, and okay, close the rest of the tabs. And I want to a little bit explain more about this VPN, point to site VPN connection. Perfect. This is actually a nice picture. So what we are going to do, we are going to securely connect individual clients. Here can be data scientists that they're running Windows, Linux, or Mac, let's say their company devices, to an Azure virtual network. Here my virtual network is my hub. So I want to have this data scientist machine using this solution connect to this virtual network. Why? Because they can connect to Azure ML Workspace, which is inside this virtual network. So this point to Site VPN will create the VPN connection either through SSTP or Secure Socket Tunneling Protocol or IKEV2, and neither, regardless of the way that we chose, the tunneling can be happening for each individual VPN client to get connected to that virtual network through the VPN gateway that we are going to actually create as well. With client, I mean each of these can be the data scientists that they have their own laptop, and using VPN they're gonna connect to this and open Azure Machine Learning Workspace. So we are still missing something here. From all we deployed, we haven't deployed any VPN gateway. So actually let's deploy this and we'll come back to see how we can then enable this VPN connection. Now I'm coming back to my Azure Machine Learning portal. So I can here type, Azure portal, VPN gateway. This is what I'm going to deploy. And there you go. You can see that I already created one inside the same resource group within the same location and the subscription. So I click on it. You can see the details of how I created, but let's create one. We're trying to create one to show you how I created this one. I clicked on create. Then same subscription, give it a name. Actually, let me see if I chose. Okay, let me go back. I can give it a name, anything, just random. Then West US, this is certain now region that we chose. VPN for gateway type, route base, all good. I don't gonna change this generation. Virtual network, my hub. Now you know this. It is telling me that this virtual network already has a gateway. Yes, because I created, but I'm just showing you how I created this. And done. I am also using the gateway subnet. Why? Coming back to this, you can see that we specified a separate gateway subnet for this gateway. And what we're doing right now, we're actually creating this gateway because we're choosing the second type of connection to Azure ML behind virtual network. So done. I clicked on create, and then what I saw the VPN gateway connected with the name I specified in the location, in the same subscription and resource group. Done. Now what I need to do, I need to generate certificates. Now what is certificates? Certificates are used by Azure to authenticate clients, or here data scientists, connecting to the virtual network over this point to site VPN connection. So when we actually obtain this root certificate, we need to upload the public key of that to Azure, and we then have the private part of it, which the client or the data scientist will have it. So we have the public side of that certificate and the private side. The public side, the information, the key will be uploaded to Azure, and the private side should be installed in the data scientist laptops when they want to use that VPN to connect to this virtual network and Azure ML behind the VNet. Then let's see actually how we can do this. It's going to be even more clear what we're doing right now. So I'm going to generate my root certificate. How can I do it? Here's the code that I used to specify. Again, I'll add this code in all the links in the video description, but I'm saying that create the root certificate and then put it to this path, and I execute it. That's it. So I ran this code, and this is what I saw. So if I open my manage user certificates, there you go. If I go to personal certificates, that's actually the same path you will see. You can see that I have, okay, let me move a little bit up. My actually certificates already created, or point to site root certificate, which I used with this given name that I have it. Also, now that was for the root certificate. Now how about for the one that client or data scientist is going to use? I have the same code but with with some minor changes. For example, here's the name that I specified for actually that certificate or the client certificate. And in the same path, when I executed this code, and again I paste the code as well, you see that the point to site child certificate is also created for me. Now I have the root certificate and also the client or data scientist here certificate. But what is this client certificate? So each client or data science computer that connects to the virtual network or Azure ML Workspace using this point to site VPN must have a client certificate or this data science certificate installed. So I generate a client certificate from the self-signed root certificate and then export and install the client certificate. Let me explain it to make it clear. If I go back to the certificate section, here is my root certificate. I right click on it, all tasks, export. Here's the wizard asking me where I want to export the key of this certificate. I click on no, don't export the private key for now because I want to separately use the client one. Click on next. Here we need to have the base 64 encoded. And if I click on next, it will ask me the path that I want to export. And then when I click on next, it will start exporting. I don't do it because I did it before and I have it in the downloaded folder that I will show you. The same thing for the child certificates. I can say this is the client or data science certificate that they need to have it in each machine that data scientists want to go to this Azure ML Workspace. So I export it, click on next, and okay, let me cancel, do it again. The way is exactly the same, but this time when I go and click on export, clicking on next, then I say yes, this is a private key, and I clicked on yes, the rest was exactly the same. So I'm not going through that because this is exactly the same, and what you will see would be this. This is my public certificate and the client one, and if I click on this public one and open it with actually a notepad, it will show me a key, a long string that is a key. Copy that because you want to upload it to Azure, okay? So, and of course keep it safe. Now, okay, I have my key copied from that certificate that we exported, but how can I upload it to Azure? Then remember we created a gateway. That's the reason. So let's click on that gateway. There's a point to site configurations. Click on it. This is what we're going to create. And I already created it, this one, so I'm not going to create it again, but you can see I clicked on new, then the root certificates, I give it a name, and actually this is what I copied from the notepad that I opened out of the exported certificate, right? So I paste it here, I saved it, done. Now I have that certificate uploaded to my Azure and the gateway that needs to have the information. But now I have that root certificate uploaded to Azure. But what about the client one, the one that a data scientist will use? Make sure you install it in your machine. I don't need it because I created this here, but let's say here is a data scientist laptop that I want to connect to using VPN to that virtual network and also Azure ML Workspace. So what I need to do, I need to install my certificate. Yes, say current user, clicking on next, just give it a path or file name, clicking on next, and a password. Remember the password that we chose when we were creating this. I'm not going to do it again because I did it before, and if you click on next, you should be fine. It will do an installation, good to go, nothing required anymore. Before I forget, when you are uploading that key in your virtual network gateway for point to site connection, beside copying and pasting the key, I told you how, again, just very quickly. When you have the public certificate here, just open it using the notepad and copy what you see. Okay, let me go to point to site configuration. So you paste it here, and also This is the address pool that you need to specify. Again, this is for me based on what I have chosen for the subnet and the connectivity to the virtual network. But for the tunnel type, choose IKE v2 and OpenVPN SSL. And the authentication type is Azure certificate. Then I told you, you install this, just click on next, 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 that's it. And then what you will see, the cool part is you see the VPN now created in your machine. Let me show you VPN. If I go to VPN settings, you can see that now I have a VPN called my hub. I name it. This is the same virtual network name that I have. That if I click on connect, it will show me there's Azure VPN. Clicking on connect, continue, yes, and all done. Now I am connected to this VPN. Does that mean I'm done? I can now open my workspace because I'm using a VPN, so I can go through the Azure Machine Learning Workspace, which is behind the virtual network. Almost, but there's one specific thing left, then we're good to go. We need to also update the DNS information inside this the host file of this laptop that I'm using to record, but it is not it is actually not required necessary for enterprises because big companies, they will have their own DNS configuration servers, so there's a central place that handle everything. But here we need to have this configuration added to the host file of my computer. So where is that DNS host file? So the DNS host file is actually located in this path. So go through Windows, System32, drivers, etc, hosts, and when you hit enter, open this with a notepad. And then, let me actually open it here. This is what you will see. You can see, you won't see this part. I added before the video. This is what you need to add. But basically, this is the part you will see. You can see some IP addresses and their DNS. So, where did I add this? You need to add the DNS for your workspace, I mean the Azure Workspace API Azure ML in the region that you want to add. Then also for the certificate API, for the notebooks of your Azure ML, for the Azure container registry, for the Azure Key Vault. Remember, a storage account, we need to have both blob and file. And then Azure ML instances, these are for the compute, and I created a compute instance in my Azure Workspace, name it MG, so I wanted to add it here as well. And each of them, they will have their own private IP. So where did I grab this? I will show you. So you need to go back to the Azure portal. Here's the resource group that we deploy everything. Remember, we created this private endpoint. We created one for Azure ML Workspace. We created two for a storage account, one of them for file, the other one for blob. You need to click on all of them, and also we created one for container instance as well. I remember. Yes, Azure Container Registry. There's a private endpoint and also Key Vault. All these private endpoints that we have. If you click on each, let's say for the container registry, if you go to DNS configuration, you will see the FQDN and also the IP address. So copy the IP address, paste it, hit space, and then paste FQDN. This is exactly what I did here. Let me show you the host again. For example, for container registry, this is the FQDN and the IP address. So I did the same in the other private endpoints. Let's say Key Vault. Again, go to DNS configurations, IP address, FQDN. That's it. I gathered them all. I updated my host file in my machine and saved this. Then you're good. Now the last component which is left is setting up the firewall and blocking internet access, right? Because as of now, the compute resources that we will potentially have in Azure ML Workspace have public internet outbound connectivity. So we would like to restrict the inbound and outbound traffic to this virtual network that we name it my hub. right? So how we can do this? This is the application of actually Azure Firewall. How I did this, I actually created an Azure Firewall. Just type in Firewall. Okay, let me remove the Azure part. Just say Firewall. There you go. You can see I already created one in the resource group. How I did it? Very simple. I clicked on create. I gave it the name. The resource group again, Azure ML Networking. In the US West again, if you remember. And Firewall tier, I think, yeah, standard is fine. I'll go with the standard. I want to use firewall policy to manage this firewall, so I'm good. For the firewall policy, I clicked on add new. I gave it a name, let's say the virtual network name. We should use the existing one that we have, which is my hub. So it's telling me that this my hub already exists because I already created a firewall for that, but telling you that you should choose the same virtual network that we have for everything, which is, I mean, this one, my hub that we rename it, right? And for the rest, oh, actually, click on existing, and here you should see my hub. There you go, and it's telling that yes, the firewall is already associated because I created before. And then for public IP address, just click on new one, give it a name, and then you're good. Just click on create. So I'm not going to do that because I did. And here's the result that I have my firewall with the firewall policy associated to that. Now what we need to do, we need to create the route table and set the route so that all the outbound traffic from virtual network goes with this firewall. So let's create a route table. Again, I did it, but show you how I did. Route table. You can see I already created one, but how I do it, clicking on create. It is actually very simple. Subscription, the resource group is networking, US West. Let's filter to US. Give it a name, and that's it. I'm not going to create because I did it before, and also make sure this one is also yes. Clicking on OK, and this is the result you will see here will be appeared. So we want to use this routing table for the inbound and outbound connectivity of the compute instances inside Azure ML. So we need to have this routing table associated with the training subnet and even deployment subnet or a scoring one. So let's open this routing table, go to subnet. If you click on associate, you will be able to see the scoring and training subnets. Choose them and click on save. I'm not going to do this because I did this, and now you see the training and the scoring subnets we created before using the script. I selected them now, and this routing table is associated with these two subnets. So what does that mean? Now once this route is enabled, we won't be able to access any site from the virtual machine or from the Azure ML compute instance, right? And we need to configure the inbound and outbound traffic in the firewall policies that we specified. But before doing so, let's make sure that we set this route. So all the traffic should go via this virtual appliance, or let's say firewall here. How can I add the route? Like clicking on route, I already created manage outgoing traffic, right? To say that for the hub, you should go through the virtual appliance or firewall. So I'm saying that to this routing table, go through the firewall and respect the inbound and outbound traffic rules, and then go through Azure ML. So more restriction we are adding, right? So how did I click on add, give it a name, address source. Here I can select IP addresses, and the source IP, choose any. That's why I'm adding 0000-0. Okay, it's saying that there's another prefix already added because I added this here. That's why giving me the error. And for the next hop, we want to go through virtual appliance here, Azure Firewall. and then I will add the address. Mine is 10.222.4, and again it won't create because it's already created one, and I clicked on add, and there you go, I have it here. Now let's go to the firewall and configure the inbound and outbound network traffic. So how do I know what are the inbound and outbound traffic needed for Azure ML computes? So based on the documentation, if I go through the Azure Firewall section, I'm inside Azure Machine documentation actually. If you go to the how-to section, security, network security, and configure required network traffic, and in the firewall section, here is the outbound configuration needed, and here are the application rules, which is, for example, if we block anything that a data scientist can access from Azure ML to public internet, that might not be a best practice because they need to maybe install some pip packages for Python, or let's say they want to connect to TensorFlow, PyTorch, or some R packages. So we can whitelist this in our rules to say that if a data scientist want access to public internet using Azure ML Workspace, if the destination is one of these, they're good. They can access it. So I grab all this for, again, output configurations and the application configuration. So here and here to add to my firewall. Let's see how it did it. So I went through the Azure firewall policy, going back to my resource group. When I created a firewall, the firewall policy also comes with it. And then here you can see the network rules and application rules. Let's first do the network rules. You can say added them one by one. How I did it, let me show you actually one of them, if I can edit one of them maybe. Yes, for example, Azure Monitor. I know it is needed actually from the documentation. Let me open it again. There you go, now I am here. So I'm actually following all the components here. You can see that all of them are also appeared here. And if I show you one, editing, for example, this one is for Azure Monitor. I give it a name, the source IP addresses. For all of them, for all these rows, the source IP address is actually my training and scoring. How I grab this, coming back to our map, you can see the training and scoring has these ranges. I added them here with a comma between. Destination type service tag, and this is for Azure Monitor, so I choose Azure Monitor. All of them are TCP, all of them are 443. That's it, the rest for all of them, but just different rule name and the destination differences. Now for the application rules, there's one I created. If I click on it, the same IP addresses, the same thing, I give it a name, but for the target, I actually copied all of them that were suggested in the documentation. Coming back to this, now I am in the application rules. So I copied them, all of them. Let's say the first one, then I put comma, then I paste the second one, comma, third one, comma, fourth one. Let me show you actually how you can see that how between each path I have added a comma, and that's it. For the protocol, HTTP 80 and 443. Clicking on save, you can see it's now created for me. Hello. This is what exactly I want. And done. Now we have the firewall, we have restricted inbound and outbound traffic through the routing table, we guide to this firewall, and then I have the VPN. I think I turn on the VPN, let me double check. Yes, connected to my hub. Then I should be able to open my Azure Machine Learning Workspace with no need to go through a VM and then from there open the Azure ML Workspace, which was the first option. Now with the second option, within my same laptop, with my same browser, because I have connected to VPN, now I should be able to open my Azure ML Workspace and don't see that error message we saw before. So this one should be disappeared. So let me close all the tabs and And let's use my browser to connect to Azure and see if we're gonna see that error message or not. There you go. I authenticated to my Azure portal, the resource group, and this is the secure machine learning, which is behind the VNet. I'm not using any VM, my laptop, and I'm connected with the VPN. So let's launch the studio and see what we will be seeing. There you go. Now that error message is gone because we are using VPN, and now I can start using my Azure Machine Learning Workspace. Finally, over. All right, this was a very crucial topic, and I really hope you enjoyed it. MG, I made some warm tea with honey inside. It's pretty good for your cough. And thanks for always helping me to learn and grow.
Wow, so kind of you, sir.
You're welcome.
Stay safe, our friends, and we'll see you later. Did you add honey inside?
Yes, perfect.